So let's do a couple terms that we hear frequently in the Gen AI landscape. And this week we've picked two that I think become conflated frequently or are used interchangeably, and they're actually quite different. So the terms we picked this week are publicly available generative AI tools and open source generative AI tools. So do you want to start us off, Bridget, by explaining what publicly available Gen AI tools are?
Yeah, I will, and then I'll turn it over to you for open source. Publicly available tools, generative AI tools, are tools that are accessible to the general public, either through web interfaces or APIs, but without disclosing or showing the public the underlying model's architecture or the code that's been used to build it. And so these are the tools that you can use often for free, sometimes either for free or with a subscription, like ChatGPT or Google's Gemini or um, Claude, and they are offered by either in the free model, as we've talked about many times, or a subscription model. But they keep the source code and details to themselves; those are proprietary. And they have some or may have some usage restrictions for some of their advanced features. In addition to some of those, there are other generative AI I'm sorry, public. I just did it. I just did exactly what we said. Other people did publicly available tools like Dolly and Midjourney for image creation, and I know there are others as well for video and audio, but those are just some of the examples. And open source means something different. How is open source different from publicly available?
So open source is different from publicly available because the actual underlying code and the model architecture are shared outside of the company that created the underlying technology. The source code becomes freely available. You can view it, you can change it if you have those capabilities. I would have no idea how to do any of that, but if you're a developer, you can go in and take a look at the underlying code and make modifications and find new applications and then distribute what you've created with others. I understand as I'm getting to understand the developer community better that this is how models advance historically is through open source opportunities where developers build on one another's work. It's very collaborative and community oriented. You can also run the code on your local infrastructure. So if you have that ability, you can, download it to your local device and play around with it and figure out new applications. We don't see, or I don't certainly, I think most people that we interact with outside of engineers and technologists don't use these versions of the models. We use the publicly available tools, but examples might be models from Hugging Face, which is a tech company, TensorFlow. And I know Meta, under Mark Zuckerberg's leadership, has sort of taken the approach of openly sourcing its code. And I think it stands alone as the major tech company doing that. I also understand there are controversies around creating open source code because of the power of the technology itself and the desire of those companies that are not openly sourcing their code to make sure that it's rolled out safely and responsibly and not placed in the hands of bad actors, which is a risk with open source coding. But it's also, I think, the way that tech communities generally develop software and new innovations in technology. So there's a little bit of friction around the conversations in Silicon Valley about whether we should be open sourcing Gen AI. Is that consistent with how you understand it?
It is, and I have a couple of times tried to dig into exactly what the arguments are on both sides of the open source debate. And it seems like there are some, sort of fundamental, foundational commitments at stake there, but there are also some commercial, competitive strands to that debate. And I haven't fully processed it all, but yeah, that's exactly how I understand the difference.
And there's a little bit of discussion, I think, in Genius Makers, which we used with our class as the sort of primer on generative AI history or AI history. And I know people like Jeff Hinton, who is the godfather of AI, but also deeply concerned about some of its ramifications. They have conversations in the book about whether open sourcing this code is a smart idea. But yeah, but also, they're all competing too. So there are other commercial reasons why they may not want to open source.
Absolutely.
So if you hear open source, it means something very different from publicly available models. But I think it's a confusing nomenclature, and understandably, people use them interchangeably.